Well, good morning, everyone, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this conference, which deals with arguably the most important challenge of our day, namely how to reduce the risks of climate change to human health. And the first slide really illustrates the speed at which we need to respond if we're going to keep climate change below 2 degrees warming above pre-industrial levels, which is the level at which most climatologists think we should aim for, because above that the risks of serious harms, extreme events, and potentially catastrophic and irreversible impacts of climate change become much higher. And the slide shows us, if we look at the second semicircles on the slide, you can see that to reach 2 degrees with a 50% probability, we have less than 30 years of current emissions left. And if we're to keep the warming to 1.5 degrees, then we have less than 10 years emissions left. So that just emphasizes the urgency within which we need to act, and the really important role and goal of building on the Paris Climate Agreement. So the recent IPCC report illustrates the effect that rising temperatures and other changes in climate, like changes in precipitation, the increasing risks that would accompany these rising temperatures. And you can see from this slide that as temperatures increase from 1, where we are at the moment, to 1.5 to 2, the risks accelerate, and that's shown by the deep red colour in the slides. You can see that in some cases, like coral reef die-off, for example, we're already experiencing those risks. For others, those risks are beginning, but their most intense phase lies some time ahead. But that time is becoming increasingly compressed, and we need, as I say, to respond very quickly. Many of these changes, of course, have very important implications for human health, either direct or indirect. So, for example, as the climate warms, the increasing temperatures, the rising sea levels, the changes in precipitation, the melting of the ice caps, and so on, these have a range of effects on health, which are summarized in this slide. They can change air pollution levels, the distribution of vector-borne diseases like dengue and malaria, the probability, the risks of water-related illnesses, diarrheal diseases, and so on. The effects of allergies can become more common. That includes the effects of increasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The effects, of course, of increasing heat, the direct effects, increasing heat-related deaths, and the reduction in labour productivity. So it becomes much more difficult for people to work outdoors. And then, of course, these really important effects, such as undernutrition, decreases in crop yield, which will affect many parts of the world that are already at risk because of undernutrition. There's also a category of very indirect effects that are difficult to quantify, but could be really serious in coming decades and are already affecting populations, such as the effects of extreme events, migration, possibly increases in conflict. So you can see that there are a whole array of the impacts of climate change on health. And in order to reduce the probability that these will seriously affect health, we will need to put in place effective adaptation mechanisms, and also to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as a matter of urgency. In 2017, for example, economic losses from weather events were the highest on record. The total estimated economic losses, according to the recent Adaptation Gap report, were over $300 billion US, of which a minority were actually insured for. And there's a big adaptation finance gap. Global public finance flows were estimated to be around $23 billion, compared with about $50 billion of the estimated needs. And as we know, of course, very small proportion of these finances actually directed towards health sector activities. Slightly larger proportion if we look at more intersectoral health-related expenditures, but still vastly under where they should be. But there is also a potential opportunity here, because many of the important health and environmental impacts that are affecting populations' health today are also linked to climate change. And one of those most powerful linkages is with air pollution, which some people have called two sides of the same coin. And the reason for that is that the majority of air pollutants are linked to the sources of greenhouse gases and other short-lived climate pollutants. Remember that the most important greenhouse gas is, of course, carbon dioxide, which stays up in the atmosphere for a long time. About 20% of it remains up in the atmosphere for 1,000 years or more. But there are also other important climate-active pollutants like methane, which has an average residence time in the atmosphere of 12 years, and very short-lived pollutants like black carbon, which also has important direct effects on human health. So these interlinkages multiply the costs arising from our current dangerous pathway, but they're also an opportunity to amplify the benefits of our actions and catalyse even greater mitigation ambition. And this slide just shows you the results of a very recent piece of work that we've published, which summarises the health benefits, or the co-benefits as they're often called, of decarbonising the world economy. In other words, removing the fossil fuel sources of greenhouse gas emissions and these short-lived climate pollutants, which would also have dramatic effects on air pollution. And we estimated perhaps 3.5 million or more deaths a year could be averted by decarbonising, removing the fossil fuels from the world economy. So that's the air pollution deaths that are prevented. Obviously the climate change related deaths would be additional. That's shown on the top part of the slide, and you can see that many of those prevented deaths would occur in Asia, China, India, Europe, parts of the US. If we look at total emissions from human activities, that includes some of the solid fuels that are burnt in households and leak out into the ambient environment, and emissions from agricultural and land use sources, then the number of preventive deaths would be even greater, over 5 million. And that would benefit health in all regions of the world. So in conclusion, there is a major challenge to reduce the very real risks that we see from climate change on human health that could come through multiple pathways. We need to adapt better to those risks as far as we can, and you'll be talking a lot about that over the next couple of days. But we also need to reduce the risk by moving rapidly to a low carbon, low pollution, and health promoting, health securing economy. So let me conclude by wishing you every success in your really important deliberations over the next couple of days, and I very much look forward to hearing the outcomes of your meeting. Thank you very much.